It's wonderful to be here at an event that starts with rituals honoring our students. And since there are a bunch of folks in the crowd who were graduate students with me, we should also have rituals that honor our teachers. And I am remembering my own teacher, Leon Henkin, who really shaped my life. And I think most of you will remember the first time when you were tired, you got up, looked in the mirror, and you saw one of your parents. It's a disorienting feeling, and we have this fantasy that we create ourselves, right? And when you look at your parents' face in the mirror, you understand how false that is. I remember the first day I got up tired, looked in the mirror, and saw the face of my thesis advisor. And he told me many things that mattered to me. He created pathways for me. But he also said that even on a really shitty day, in this job, you can pick a student and do something wonderful for them. And that has stayed with me. And on really bad days, I pick a student and try to do my best to create things that they could not otherwise do. So speaking of rituals, there is an important ritual, academic ritual at this time of year, that generates much more anxiety at the University of Texas than the University of Maryland. And it involves college ratings. What, pray tell, is he talking about? I could see on Nancy's face. It's the Princeton Review Party School of the Year ratings, which are about to come out. They are sequenced to come out just when we're in the budget negotiations with our legislature. And we were so happy to fall out of the top 20. Now we're number 8 last year. And we're desperately hoping for a lower rating this year. But 3 years ago, unfortunately, on the day when we were holding a legislative retreat for the Appropriations Committee and Education Committees, it was announced that UT Austin was #1 Party School of the Year. And I had the unhappy position of being first up to talk to our legislators. And you could see the amount of concern on the faces of the senior administrators of the University of Texas. So I started by saying, look, I know this is a source of concern for some of my colleagues, but I, as a working faculty member, because professors must profess, feel strangely reassured. Because when students had been throwing up in my 8 a.m. calculus class, I thought it was because of my teaching. And now, so I want to talk about some difficult aspects of STEM education, of teaching. And I want to start by addressing some of the mythologies around STEM education. When, as scientists, we climb into a world and want to understand it, it's important to map out what the mythology is, because the mythology directs people's energy to particular problems. And in preparation, in advance of this lecture, about 15 faculty members wrote to me with their views of what needed to happen in math and science education in Maryland. And every one of the letters presented the state of affairs as if it were a catastrophe. There was not one iota of evidence presented in any of the letters suggesting that anything good was happening. And in STEM education, we seem addicted to this idea that we are at the bottom of the world in international. You ask people who should know the facts, and people believe that in international comparisons, we're somewhere between Rwanda and Botswana in international performance. I understand the addiction of leaders to using fear rhetoric, but in fact, fear, as social psychologists have taught us, does not generate action. It generates in the long term denial. And unless educators, faculty and teachers, and administrators have clarity about what they have succeeded at and how far they have come, they will not have the courage to take on the next challenging problems we have to take on. So let me start by addressing the mythology. I started actually This student who won this award came from two-year college. I actually am the only member of my department, 100 of us, who has a community college degree in horticulture. I went through the voc ed track, worked as a groundsman on the Los Angeles Community College system for 7 years. I gave a few years ago the talk to the returning faculty and certificated workers, and they retired my gardening uniform. So let's see what the actual situation is about international comparisons. It turns out that the United States, so there are two measures of comparing ourselves with others. There's the TIMSS and PISA. The TIMSS is more a test of what students learn in school. The PISA is more a test of whether students can use what they learn in school. 15-year-olds can use it in somewhat unfamiliar circumstances. Since 1999, when we were in the middle of the pack, we have been rising steadily, and now there are only 5 countries, the Asian countries, that outperform the US. This shows sustained 20-year gains in math and science education in this country. Poor children now know 2 to 3 years more mathematics than they did in 1990. This is something to be celebrated. That's not to say there isn't urgency and we need to do much better. In too many of our urban districts, only 50% of African American and Latino students graduate. But we have to balance our messages of urgency with messages of hope, or we will not mobilize people to work on challenging problems. And how does Maryland do? Okay, I'm an actual teacher, so I know this is a crappy slide. So imagine it to be like an operatic prop, right? Conveying shared emotion. Gary Phillips, the former commissioner of the National Center for so there's red. I try to get red and yellow bars here, but I couldn't quite pull that off. Maryland actually performs better than most European countries, and it's tied with Hungary, the Netherlands, the European countries that traditionally have the highest performance in mathematics. This was done using a linking study. In 2007, several states actually participated in TIMSS as if they were countries. Normally, Texas, which thinks of itself as a country, does this. But currently, our governor is more interested in secession. Right. I don't know. I figure maybe to raise money, we can sell the border wall he's building on Mexico and sell it to Oklahoma, right, if we're successful. And the idea is that maybe if Texas did secede, the United States would invade it for its oil. So Massachusetts and Minnesota actually participated. And actually, for people who know these states and individuals like me who work with the Japanese government on helping their schools in trouble, we were not surprised. Massachusetts did as well as the highest performing Asian countries, better than Japan. White students in Texas outperformed Japanese students on TIMSS. Almost no educators understand that we actually have produced significant gains. 8th grade, not quite as strong, but better than any of the European countries. This is a real accomplishment to be celebrated. Why is there slippage in the 8th grade? Largely because the 8th grade is a fluke, and in the Asian high-performing countries, it's the year in which there's an extremely high-stake national exam. So it actually inflates their performance that year. So this is not, it's not a sign that the United States is actually slipping from elementary to middle school. When we look at science, right next to Singapore, as you'll see in a minute, that Massachusetts actually does not do better than Maryland. Right? So were Maryland to participate, which it should in all these comparisons, and I think you're trying to arrange that, you would get a real measure of how well the state is doing.